Hi, fifth graders. Today we're going to do lesson 6.5, subtracting fractions. Our standard says that we can add and subtract fractions, including mixed numbers, with unlike denominators using equivalent fractions. We're going to start here on page 375, lesson 6.5. Now, in this lesson, they have addition and subtraction in it. Today, we're only doing the subtraction. Tomorrow, we will do the addition part of this lesson. So this will be a 2-day lesson here. Today, we're doing subtraction. So we're going to start on 376 right here where they start the subtraction problems. Whenever we add or subtract fractions, the first thing we always have to find is a common denominator. Both of the bottom numbers in our fractions need to be the same. So we cannot do anything with those fractions until we find a common denominator. Now remember, when we are finding common denominators, we're thinking common multiples. Okay, we're thinking the least common multiple. So we want to count by 10 and count by 5 until we find a number that they both can turn into. So if we're counting by 10s, we could go 10, 20, 30. Okay, if we're counting by 5s, we got 5, 10, 15, 20. We could keep going. But we know that it has 10 and 20 in common. So any one of those would work. But we want to try to use the least common denominator if we can. So we want to turn both fractions into tens on the bottom. 10 is our least common denominator. Well, 9/10 already has a 10 on the bottom. So we're not even going to change the top number at all because it's already 9/10. It already has the common denominator. But for 2/5, we need to multiply 5 times 2 to get 10. And our saying is whatever we do to the bottom, we also need to do to the top. So we're going to do 2 times 2, which is 4. Now, for this lesson here, for these subtraction problems, once you have the same denominator, all you have to do is subtract the numerators. So we're going to subtract 9 minus 4, and we're going to get 5. And the denominator is going to stay the same. And that's how you subtract fractions. Now, once you have your answer, all fractions we should be trying to put into simplest form. So if you're struggling with simplest form, look back to that video, how to do simplest form. But basically now we're looking for factors of 5 and 10. What numbers go into 5 that also go into 10? Now we're not talking multiples. We're talking factors. So we're talking what numbers go into 5? 1 times 5. And that's it. Now what numbers give us 10? 1 times 10 and 2 times 5. They have a common factor of 5. So we can divide the top and the bottom by 5. 5 divided by 5 is 1. 10 divided by 5 is 2. And our answer in simplest form is 1/2. So when we are adding and subtracting fractions, you first have to find a common denominator. So you count by both denominators until you find something they have in common. Then you change to equivalent fractions. We change 2/5 into 4/10. Once the denominators are the same, you then can subtract the numerators and get your answer. The last step is always to look to see if we can put it into simplest form. We're going to skip questions 1, 2, and 3 today. We will come back to those tomorrow. So let's look at example problem number 4 here. We have 3/4 minus 1/8. Now our first step is going to be to find a common denominator. So I want to count by 4s and I want to count by 8s. So I'm thinking 4 times 1 is 4, 4 times 2 is 8, 4 times 3 is 12, 4 times 4 is 16, okay? And then we count by 8s. 8 times 1 is 8, 8 times 2 is 16, 8 times 3 is 24. Finding a number that they have in common. 8 is a common denominator. They both can turn into 8s. Now, they both can turn into 16s, or 24 or 32, and those are fine as well. But they will require you to do more work at the end when you put it into simplest form. You want to use the least common multiple so that you can use the least common denominator. 1/8 is going to stay 1/8 because if the bottom didn't change, the top is not going to change. But for 3/4, we multiply 4 times 2 to get 8. So whatever I do to the bottom, I must do to the top to keep it equivalent. 3 times 2 equals 6. So we change 3/4 into 6/8. Once we have the same bottom number, the same denominator, we can go ahead and subtract. We know that the denominator will not change. But our numerator is 6 minus 1, which is 5. Our answer is 5/8. And the last thing we have to do is check to see is it in simplest form. Well, 5 is 1 times 5. And for 8, it's 1 times 8 and 2 times 4. Nothing goes into either one of those except for 1. Remember, simplest form is when the only common factor of the numerator and the denominator is 1. So our answer is 5/8. Let's look at the next one. Now, it's written horizontally here, each one of these problems. I feel it's easiest if we stack those vertically or on top of each other, such as 1/4 and 1/7. It makes it easier when we work out to the right. And you're really going to like it when we start using mixed numbers and we have a whole number there with it. It's going to just make things so much easier. So make sure you stack your fractions on top of each other. 1/4 and 1/7. They do not have the same denominator. So we have to count by 4s and count by 7s until we find a number that they have in common. One trick that works some of the time to help you out is that you can multiply the two denominators together. Now remember, this will not give you the least common denominator all the time, but it will give you a common denominator. So if I took 4 times 7 and got 28, that is a common denominator. And in this case, 28 is the least common denominator. Now, going back to the previous problem, if I would have taken 4 times 8, I would have gotten 32. 32 would work as a common denominator, but it is not the least common denominator. So we wouldn't necessarily want to use that because it would require a little bit more work at the end, but it would still give us the correct answer of 5/8 when we got done. So back to question number 5 here. Our common denominator is 28. We're going to take 4 times 7 to get that 28. And whatever I do to the bottom, I must do to the top. So we're going to do 1 times 7, which is 7. Then I'm going to take 7 times 4 to get 28. So I do the same to the numerator here. 1 times 4 equals 4. Once my denominators are the same, I can then go ahead and subtract. 7 minus 4 equals 3, and our denominator does not change. It is still 28. Check to see if there's anything that we can divide by. The only things that go into 3 are 1 and 3. And the only numbers that go into 28 are 1 and 28, 2 and 14, and 4 and 7. So 2 and 14, and then 4 and 7. And the only thing they have in common is 1. So this 3/28 is in simplest form. All right, we're going to work through number 6 here. 9/10 minus 1/4. Remember, we could multiply those those two denominators together to get a common denominator, or we can just count by 10s and 4s until we find something they have in common. Well, if I count by 4s, I would go 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, and I know 10, 20, 20 is a common denominator. We do 10 times 2 to get 20, so I have to do 9 times 2 to keep it equivalent, and that gives me 18. We do 4 times 5 to make 20, so we have to do 1 times 5 to keep it equivalent. And now that the denominators are the same, we can go ahead and subtract. I'm going to go ahead and change colors to make it easier to see. And we go 18 minus 5 is 13. 20 is our denominator. And the only thing that goes into 13 and also goes into 20 is 1. This fraction is in simplest form. Let's turn the page. Zoom this in a little bit more here. We're looking at 11, 12, 13, and 14 now. Number 11 is 1/2 minus 3/8. The denominators are different, so the first step is find a common denominator. Count by 2s, count by 8s until you find something they have in common. You could use 16, but that's not the least common denominator. 8 is the least common denominator, so we're going to use 8 here. Since the bottom fraction is already an 8, we have 3/8. The top fraction is 1/2. We need to multiply it by 4. And whatever I do to the bottom, I must do to the top to keep it equivalent. So 1 times 4 equals 4. Now we go ahead and subtract. 4 minus 3 equals 1. And 8 is the denominator. It stays the same. 1/8 is our answer, and it's already in simplest form. Now, I also want to solve it using 16 to just show that it would still work if you multiplied the two denominators together. So if I took 2 times 8 and got 16, I could use that as the common denominator. So if you ever get stuck and you're not sure what the common denominator is, just multiply the two denominators together. We're going to use 16, and we're going to go 2 times 8 and 1 times 8 to get there. And that's going to give me 8/16 on the top. The bottom fraction, 3/8, multiplied by 2 over 2, and we get 6/16. We go ahead and subtract, just like we have been. 8 minus 6 is 2 over 16. Now we have the fraction 2/16. Before we're done, we have to think, what can go into both 2 and go into 16? And that is 2. 2 goes into 2, and 2 also can go into 16. So if I divide the top by 2 and the bottom by 2, we get back to that answer of 1/8. And that is in simplest form. On number 12 here, we have 5/7 minus 2/3. And we're looking for the common denominator. One of the shortcuts I think maybe is an easy way for students to come up with a common denominator is choose the denominator that is the smaller one and count by that number until you find something that maybe the larger one will go into. So if we use 3 and started counting by 3s, we're going to see which number it lands on that 7 would also go into. So if we're counting, we've got 3, and then 6, then 9, then 12, which 7 doesn't go into, 15, 7 doesn't go into, 18 doesn't work, but 21 does. And again, 7 times 3 would be 21. So 21 is our common denominator. The next step is, what do you multiply by to get that denominator? I want you to press pause, finish this problem, and then press play again to reveal this answer for number 12. Do not move on to number 13 and 14 just yet. Now, hopefully as you looked at this, you went 7 times 3 gave me 21, and whatever I do to the bottom, I must do to the top. We're doing 5 times 3 is 15. Then on the bottom, we have 3 times what gives me 21, that's 7. Whatever I do to the bottom, I must do to the top, and that gives us 14 as the numerator. Now our subtraction problem is this right here. 15 21st minus 14 21st. 15 minus 14 is 1, and our denominator stays the same of 21. 1 over 21, or 1/21st. Scroll that down here so you can see it. Now, I want you to do numbers 13 and 14 on your own. Stack those up, find a common denominator, change it to those common denominators, making equivalent fractions by what did I multiply the bottom by to get the top. And then, once you change those to equivalent fractions, subtract it. If you're able to put it into simplest form, try it. All right, so let's talk about this. Those are probably kind of challenging problems because the first couple were pretty easy denominators. Hopefully you found the common denominator for 9 and 6 a little bit easier than maybe you found 12 and 15. But let's go through these problems. If you didn't maybe necessarily understand that, let's just go ahead and follow along and see if you catch on here. For 4/9 and 1/6, the common denominator was 18. Now that's the least common denominator. That's the smallest denominator they have in common. You may have used 36, and I'll go over that here in a second at the end. But you have 18. We took 9 times 2 to get 18, so I did the same to the top. 4 times 2 was also 18. And I got 8/18. Then I took 6 times 3 to get 18, so I do 1 times 3 to get 3. We have 3/18. Then I subtract the 2. 8 minus 3 gives us 5, and the denominator stays the same at 18. Now some of you may have used 36, and you would have had something like this. 16 over 36 minus 6 over 36. And when you subtracted, you had 10/36, which is fine, but you have to put it into simplest form, and 2 would go into both of those numbers. If I divided both by 2, I would get back to 5/18. So putting that into simplest form. For the last one here, we had 11/12 and 7/15. The common denominator was 60. So you should have 12 times 5, which is 60, and then you do 11 times 5, which is 55. Then we do 15 times 4 to get our 60. So whatever I do to the bottom, I must do to the top. And I do 7 times 4, which is 28. Then I can go ahead and subtract those, and 55 minus 28, if you borrow, should give you 27. So that would make it 27/60. Now, that's a good answer, but we want to see if we can put that into simplest form. So what can we think of that goes into 27 and also goes into 60? Well, I was thinking for 27, we had 1 in 27 and 3 times 9. So which one of those would go into 60 as well? And that would be 3. So we're going to divide both the top and the bottom by 3. 27 divided by 3 is 9. 60 divided by 3 is 20. So the final answer is 9/20 in simplest form. All right, tonight for homework, you are doing just the subtraction problem. So you want to turn to the homework here. And the subtraction problems are 2, 5, number 6, and number 7 on the front. The rest are addition, and we'll get to those in the next lesson. On the back, we are doing 2, 4, and 6. And you can put those answers onto Schoology when you have that work completed. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out and message Mrs. Laudiker or I. Great job today. Have a good day.